Hello and welcome to another video. This video is going to just be about Sentinel and Marauder, but we're going to do it from the Sentinel point of view. And on top of that, we're kind of just winging it. So if you're just interested in like gameplay and whatnot, there's not going to be any gameplay in this one. I'm just going to be talking about talents and just in general abilities that we currently have and kind of comparing them to other classes, talent choices and whatnot, basically like a talent system reorder. So the first thing I want to start off with is that Marauder got hit really hard in 7.0 when the launch happened. Part of the issue for Marauder at launch was that Fury was incredibly good. They made a change to Fury and concentration. I can spec it real quick just to show you. There was a change to one of these passives. Let me find it real quick. Was this one? Yeah, it was this one. Okay, so after you use a Furious Strike, basically what happens is that you get yellow and white defense chance for 10% for 6 seconds. Previously, that was pretty much only a white damage. Now it is also including yellow damage. So that means you can randomly resist a stun just by dodging it. Previously, you didn't have access to this, so this was a survival increase specifically to Fury. However, it also had an auto crit, and the auto crit was very powerful. It was in this selection here. Originally, we had the auto crit, and then it got changed to like this one. It was tied to like this one. And that was just too overpowered for parsers because parsers were able to click off their Fury stacks, or I guess their Berserk stacks, to then build their Fury stacks once again so they could build it faster. So in a parse situation where you're just parsing, you're pressing buttons, you can constantly keep clicking it off. However, it wasn't very applicable in actual content. And that made its parses like way high, like at the beginning of the expansion, or a little bit later on into the expansion, it was parsing like 37k way before anything else could hit that high. Now we are seeing classes parsing that high, and it's a shame to see Fury basically got gutted damage-wise. But not only that, we had a tactical called Defel Splice Genes, I believe. I'll go grab that real quick just so any of you can see it, just in case like some of you may not know what it is or you weren't around here for it, and it's totally understandable. You missed out on probably one of the best times that Fury Marauder has had in a long time. It kind of reminded me of 5.0 Marauder. However, you had less focus on Fear Strike and more focus on Raging Burst, which was great because when it comes to doing damage, yellow damage is just that much better. So this used to reset your forced camouflage whenever you use predation. So you would have basically effectively 12 seconds of camouflage if you really, really needed it. Most of the time you wouldn't do that, but you could do it. And that was crazy. But effectively, after you had used it once, you were only able to basically use it to reset it, and you could effectively get a 30-second cooldown on your forced camouflage if you're using it on cooldown, which is quite useful, but also at the same time, the amount of purges, it basically increased the amount of purges that you had. It made it very hard for somebody to keep you at bay, if that makes sense, because you have forced crush, you would have the immunity still, which now you have to spec into. That was another nerf that they did to the class, hurting it even further, which doesn't help us at all, obviously. You would have that, and then you would have the Saber Ward, which does not include knockbacks and like pushes. So you could still get like knocked during that, but the Force Crush immunity could not be. And then if you had the 10% defense chance, you could also just RNG dodge it too, or resist it. You kind of get the ideal. They've anyway gutted the class even further than it really needed to be. The damage nerf was not necessary. This is a pure damage class. There is nothing pretty much else going on here. Its durability is very bad. Defel Splice Genes being removed basically made it an actual target once again. The main reason why that it was functioning in the way that it was is because it could get into stealth and stay into stealth so often and so consistently that made it an impossible to target class. However, that is incredibly overpowered. I do think the version of forced camouflage, I guess Defel Splice Genes was too powerful, and I totally understand the nerf and just the removal in general. It's been turned into something that's like almost completely useless. However, parsing this can be useful, which is funny. Main reason the class's damage got nerfed in the first place was because of parsing. I'm not really a fan of things like these because they basically work in a way that pretty much you have to have it to parse cheese. And when it comes to parsing, especially making it more accessible and more fun for everybody involved, having cheeses like these, while they can be fun, get really annoying and just make parsing in general, in my opinion, kind of boring and not as fun, because you can't just pick up and do it. You have to do a series of things to get the perfect opener, and while that is important, it's not always like, how to put it, it's not always a skill expression thing. It's more so just a trivial thing. Everybody can do it. It's not actually that difficult once you've learned how to do it. Pretty much have mastered that. You have muscle memory for it. A lot of people aren't even going to bother because they're going to see the amount of effort they have to put into it, and they're not going to bother to parse correctly, much less alone spend the time to master the rotation and do more damage. So really all it is doing is hurting the class, and things like that. Yeah, that's my own opinion on that. I don't want to go into that because we're talking about Marauder here, or Sentinel. Now, since we're already on concentration, which is Fury, we're just going to go ahead and start off with the first things. I'm going to say some things that might make you a little upset. So first things first is that there's a talent here for concentration. It also exists for Fury. It's not been bugged. It's just not, what to put it. The Sentinel version is most likely not bugged, but the Fury Marauder version is most likely bugged. So the range, or I guess the radius of this ability is smaller on Fury and it is bigger on Sentinel. So this talent is actually very good sometimes, but it's specifically good on Sentinel and not Fury. Much like how the Vanguard and power attack differences were, where you couldn't really build power load stacks because it wasn't working correctly on PT, but it was on Vanguard. There's a bug between the classes, just like Gunslinger and Sniper. They also have the same issues. Mirror classes usually have some sort of issue. Scoundrel and Operative often always have issues too. Unfortunately, this is just one of them. I have bug reported it. I just don't really want the Sentinel version to be nerfed, because the Sentinel version gets nerfed. Like, there's literally never ever a point to ever run this again. And that is tragic, because I think it is a very cool and different playstyle that you could play, and I've enjoyed it for a long time. A lot of people do know about this if you play this class. I have mentioned it before, but I suppose it's a good time to mention it again. And most likely the Fury version is bugged and the concentration version is not, so it would be great if they would fix that, make Marauders better. But in reality, like, we're not doing too hot in the first place, so, you know, if you're gonna nerf a skin, whatever. Now, this one, I like the ideal for the most part, but the other options are just too good. Having extra damage on focus burst, well, that can be good and will allow you to hit really hard. The trauma factor is the interesting part. Having both of these at the same time is really nice. Now, I do feel like the trauma should probably be attached to something else, and I also think that this talent as a whole is just too generic to be, like, you've got an AoE option, that's great. You've got a single target / AoE. This basically buffs everything. 9 times out of 10, you're just going to be better off with this. If you're constantly cleaving, like if you're constantly hitting like 4 targets or more, like this is always going to pull ahead. But at any situation where it's inconsistent, this is always going to pull ahead because this buffs all of your damage, and it also allows you to run lower crit rate, so you can have more accuracy or you can have more alacrity. So most of the time you always want Zenith, you don't want to bother with unstable focus, and this is only a option if you're playing Sentinel. If you're not playing Sentinel, this is not even an option. You pretty much always go Zenith. Now this one's also really good too, like sometimes where you have normal stats. You're not playing high alacrity like I like to do, or you're running really a lot of accuracy. Like sometimes in matches, people are going to have Saber Ward, and there's no way that any accuracy is going to help you. The match is going to end too quickly for accuracy to have value in the first place. Sometimes you're going to find this to be a little bit more useful because you're going to have proper crit, you're going to have proper alacrity. You're not really going to have to worry about anything other than killing the healer or getting a target down first. Healer is just something I naturally defaulted to, but you kind of like get the idea to reduce the healing of the enemy, so they're easier to kill. Now, it would be nice to have a different option here besides just trauma. Maybe trauma just, I don't know how to describe it. I feel like there should definitely be something a little bit more unique here, but I don't have any suggestions here. I suppose like having like a Furious Strike auto crit would be something a little bit more interesting in my opinion. However, at the same time, you know, I feel like not having our auto crit on Zen anymore is a weird decision, and I think if they want to keep PvE and PvP separate, it's going to be very difficult to give things to PvP that isn't going to affect PvE. There has to be like some sort of separation and or a way to make it balanced in a PvE meta. So for example, maybe it is just give it a Furious Strike that applies trauma, but also it's an auto crit. That'd be pretty good. However, you know, is it comparable? Probably not, because you could still miss it. But you get the ideal. Generally, I think this one's terrible. These two are not bad. This one's bugged on Fury. Going into the next part, this is something that really annoys me. Predation. When you think of Marauder and Sentinel, what do you think of? Typically guarded by the Force or guarded by the Devs, as some would say, or Undying Rage. We pretty much think of those abilities, and then the second thing that you usually think about is Predation and Transcendence. Why is it a talent to pick your core mobility? It makes no sense. It should not be a talent. If anything, I feel like we should have a selfish Predation, and if we want to give it to group, maybe we spec into it. I think that would probably be a good compromise if they were looking into that. Maybe remove the defense chance, but keep the purge baseline and the movement speed baseline. Just make it selfish. And then if you spec into it, maybe give the defense chance and the AoE purge to everybody and the movement speed. Maybe that's how they could do that. But generally, I do feel like not having predation baseline is very silly, so I don't really even agree with this existing. It should just be there. Ravage Root is a amazing tool for us since we don't have our trauma slash crippling, basically our crippling slash, which used to be ranged, and then they changed it back to melee. Now we don't have it at all. Not having Ravage Root kind of hurts us, but for Fury it's less so noticeable because you already have Obliterate Root, but on Carnage, not having a root in general is very noticeable, and not having a root on Annihilation is also very noticeable. Having a root available really helped Dot Smash, and it really helped Carnage. Just its burst pretty much guaranteed. Basically giving this back baseline would be a great move forward, especially for Annihilation and Carnage. Does Fury need it? No. So it could just be removed. And I think this just shouldn't exist. All three specs, this does not need to exist. We don't need more slows. 50% slow is obnoxious. It lasts for 10 seconds. It just never needed to exist. There is a variation where you can actually run this and it's not that bad, but in general, no. It straight up doesn't need to exist. We do not need more slows. This is not a healthy thing, and it is not creative. So I would just get rid of this entire row here. Probably make these two baseline, maybe not give Ravage Root to Fury, though it wouldn't be bad on Fury, but I just, you know, if we want to not make things too strong, that would probably be the route that I would go. So you wouldn't be making Fury or not Fury, you wouldn't be making Carnage more broken than it already is. It would obviously help Carnage a lot, where a lot of people do struggle to play the class, but at the same time, you know, Annihilation, and like it's a parsing spec, and when it comes to PvP, it's not doing too hot. Now getting into this tree, I think this is another one of those, like, does it really need to exist? Like, all three of these options are really silly. These are passives for sure, and this is what I would probably expect out of like a passive choice rather than a talent choice. I feel like talents should be a little bit more impactful, but that's totally okay. I don't think this really needs to exist. I understand that for parsing it's pretty good. it's just a flat damage increase. This is great for like heroics, like if you're doing something where you're killing a lot of trash mobs really fast, or in a situation where people are dying really fast in war zones, you can get some value out of this. But for the most part, you know, this doesn't get too much use. This gets use in parsing. And or if you just want to give up the little extra survivability, which is oftentimes not terrible because you don't have much survivability in the first place. So having a little extra doesn't really make that much of a difference. The same thing goes for like rage on Juggernaut. This is like another one that I feel like, you know, it's very low priority and doesn't need to exist, but it does. I wouldn't be opposed to this just being baseline and then just removing the other two. Or maybe making these two baseline and removing that one, or maybe moving this somewhere else. Maybe move this one down here just so we have more variety of selection. Because there would be maybe a reason to run that, or I don't know, something else. I do feel like it should probably just not exist. Now when we get to 43, this is another thing where this row has been nerfed twice. I do feel like Force Clarity is pretty mediocre. If we get the old version of Fearless Victor, not Fearless Victor, Descent of the Fearless, we get the old version of that where it gave us charges back and it gave the damage bonus. This could actually be pretty useful again, but the problem is that its uptime is terrible, and that's the main reason why it's just not worth it. And then when it looks at, or I guess when you look at the other two here, this one is not very great. Sure, it can allow you to do your rotation endlessly without really ever having to worry about using battering too much, but it won't compare damage wise to the critical chance increase of 20% during Zen. Well, Zen isn't up for a crazy amount of time. Most of your burst damage is going off during Zen, so it's up when it needs to be. And then another talent row. Typically before they made the change of getting CC immunity on Carnage, I feel like this probably should have existed. But when Carnage got CC immunity, this should have no longer been a thing. This should have just been baseline. It used to be part of the passive tree. There's no reason for them to rip that out. I really think that should just go back to what it was. AoE DR could be tied to something else. It doesn't need to be here. It could be tied to Transcendence, honestly. Especially if you're going to give, let's say you give the solo predation, right? You spec into this for the group predation, you could tie the AoE DR also to it. So they kind of get pigeonholed into actually pitching that point still for like group content or, you know, like raids, and then maybe give PvP talent here. I don't know. It's just an ideal. It's hard to really do something like that or make suggestions for that, but for the most part, there are just some really bad selections and really noob bait issues going on. These two I would consider both noob bait, and they don't compare to criticality. Now, obviously this one is very useful. It has no business being up this high. This should be selected somewhere like way down here. Well, to the developers that might seem like it's an important thing, it's not actually that important. Most of the time or at least majority of the time, you're not going to find use out of this, and for the most part, you don't really need the extra rage on this spec. It can be useful on the other ones, but for the most part, they've made it so that resource management is almost irrelevant on majority of classes and specs in the game, that this plays much less role than they might realize. The main thing that you get out of this is that your CC breaker is reduced by 30 seconds, which brings it down to 1 minute and 30, which is huge. However, you can't really afford it because you have to go this one, and then 2 stacks on. Leap is just good in general. I feel like this is really important. They kind of got this one right. This one just shouldn't exist. It should be a baseline again, and this one is just not as important as I think it is. It should be really done here. I do like the utility choices that they have made for the most part when it comes to like utility power rather than actual damage increase or survival increase. I like these things. I don't mind these. I just do think that they should be all in the same row, not like individually spread out. Now going to 64. This should go back to being a passive. This used to be a part of Annihilation before they basically took it out and made it a talent. I don't remember when they did that. It was at 5.0 or 6.0. It was one or the other. I do understand the power of it, and I understand the reason you would want it. So potentially, if they really want to do that, they could take Adamant and Adjudicator. They could put this in the same row with Trailblazer. Like all three of these abilities are about as equal and important, in my opinion. And they could put it down like here instead. Just replace 27 row. Make this baseline. Make this baseline on 2 of the 3 specs. Put these 3 right here. Maybe completely remove this and add these 2 as passives, because it wouldn't necessarily make the class that much stronger. It would definitely help them, but it wouldn't make it that stronger. This is an interesting one. They could maybe add this in there instead of Trailblazer. Trailblazer, honestly, with the current edition of only 50% more damage, honestly, it should be 25 and or just don't exist. So that's my opinion on that one. So maybe we hold on to this one, we put this one and these 2 in there. That wouldn't be a bad ideal. And then going into this row outside talking about that, we have Zilius Ward. I think this should be baseline. I don't understand why it's not. Saber Ward is already pretty meh. Sometimes it's very powerful and other times it's very bad. So the problem with Saber Ward and Deflection in PvP is the fact that it is defense chance. A lot of the meta damage classes in the game are now yellow damage. Back in the day, white damage used to outperform yellow. Now it's vice versa. And for the most part, Saber Ward doesn't really do anything against them. Obviously, Saber Ward does get 25% yellow damage absorbed, so it'd be force and attack attacks, which is great. Don't get me wrong. If it was 30%, it'd probably be even stronger. But if you want to take it even further, I do think maybe just give it damage reduction, change it to damage reduction instead, and things would be even more consistent and more powerful. If you changed Saber Ward today, obviously this is probably not something that they would want for PvE because it's going to make things a lot harder for them. Would be changing Saber Ward and Deflection into just raw damage reduction. I do feel like a strong anti-tunnel defensive, especially on 3-minute cooldown, is probably something really important. Obviously, this inherently buffs Grit Teeth and inherently buffs players that will, you know, play. I had a whole bunch of stuff on sale. That's kind of annoying. It will play like tank, right? So you get the reduced cooldown on Saber Ward and then you have Grit Teeth. That'll obviously buff them in a way, maybe make it a little bit less powerful on tank, maybe. It's hard to say, right? Without actually just trying stuff, we don't actually know how good something might be or might not be, or how willing players will be to accept it, unfortunately. Making no changes, however, is definitely killing the game and people are losing interest, and they've pretty much been there, done that, done everything at this point. Not changing anything is terrible, and the main content for PvP updates when it comes to changes, it's mainly combat changes, adding new tacticals, new set bonuses, changing the talents order, basically shifting the meta, if you will. That's the content for them for the most part. Now, when it comes to stuns, I just want to go over this before I even get into this row. When it comes to stuns, I felt like they should have either pruned them all or pruned none of them. The main thing that I wanted them to prune going into 7.0 was all the mezzes. Get rid of all the mezzes, only allow tanks to take their mezz or healers to take their mezz. That would be the only exception, and force them to give up one of their utility points for like helping somebody survive. So for example, you would trade ability to survive for their mezz. So it wouldn't be a terrible trade-off and most people wouldn't take it. You would have to give a reason for them to not take it, make it detrimental in a way. So for example, Sorcerer could lose its pool DR, which they already flat out removed. But if it was available for healer, that'd be good. So in the row where Roland is, for example. That would be not a terrible ideal. Obviously, it would have to be something different for medicine because, for example, they could probably just add Revitalizers back. Honestly, Revitalizers is something that medicine needs, and having to pick that or Flashbang would be a much better choice. It is struggling defensively, and it should have Revitalizers back. So that would be honestly a great choice for them. And most people would not take flashbang in that situation. However, it very much so could. Anyway, getting into this row, I do think Marauder should have its choke. And the main reason why I say that is because it's a pure damage class. It doesn't have utility, doesn't have much to offer outside of predation, obviously. And it's raid buff. It is a class that isn't doing great defensively, and since it's purely focused on damage, I don't understand why it wouldn't have a stun to basically ensure its damage. And then, of course, when you think about the class, top 3 abilities, I would say it'd be Mad Dash. So Mad Dash is just an iconic warrior ability. Dying Rage is probably #1 thing that you think about when you think of Marauder and Sentinel. So honestly, this should probably be just baseline. I don't understand why it's not. I'm also surprised that, you know, out of all the things that they could have done, is that they could have definitely just changed Rebuke or Cloak of Pain. If they really wanted to prune something, they could make Undying Rage better and kind of like fuse the two. And I don't mean like in a way of like, oh, Rebuke is now part of Undying Rage. That's stupid because that's 9% DR plus 20. That's not. That's literally helping nobody. I'm talking about more about like getting hit. After Guarded by the Force, you have extra lingering damage reduction, or have it work vice versa. For example, like whenever you're hit while Guarded by the Force is on cooldown, the cooldown reduction of Guarded by the Force gets reduced, kind of like how Grit Teeth works. So if you were getting hit, you would have that going. And while it was on cooldown, you had Rebuke up, for example, or something like that, or just have Rebuke. There was a set bonus, I believe, that you had Rebuke up and you were getting hit while Rebuke was up, you get cooldown reduction on Guarded by the Force. I think that was actually an amazing thing they had. If they actually just made that a talent and put it right there, I would take that. That would be 100% something that I would really want. I'm not opposed against Blade Blitz being a talent. I do think, however, it probably doesn't belong so high up. It is a vital movement ability, and it would really suck to be choosing that over a really powerful defensive or our only access to CC. Like, I feel like if we have to spec into our CC, we should have to way down here. Pretty much all 3 of these, I would say they're right down here. So vital. However, Guarded by the Force should just be baseline. And if Guarded by the Force was baseline, and the Rebuke talent was to come, where if you take damage while you're using a Rebuke or while it's up, just as a cooldown Guarded by the Force, if that was actually a talent, I do feel like it should be up near the top. That would be justifiable. Now, as much as I would love to have Mad Dash, I like the fact that mercenaries don't have Shadow unless they want to give up Reflect. I like that. So I can totally understand not wanting to have warriors, you know, having Mad Dash without giving up something. I'd be more inclined to give up Rebuke than I would be Mad Dash. And that seems kind of crazy. That's a lot of damage reduction to lose, but for the most part, we do have the anti-tunnel mechanic of Force Camouflage. So it's hard to really balance that or say like what could probably go there, but in the end, it's hard to justify a Blade Blitz. I think it is a important thing, and I do think like if they reworked this one, gave us Undying originally and gave us the cooldown reduction on that, obviously that'd be great. So if it was a tunnel target, then obviously it's way harder to kill, but at the same time, you know, you still have Force Camouflage, so it doesn't really matter. I would just like to see the survivability of the class actually be better, and if they just changed Saber Ward, that would fix the entire problem, and the Guarded by the Force ideal should just not be changed. However, yeah, current version of Marauder is not very good, and current version of Saber Ward is very bad. And fixing Saber Ward / deflection would fix multiple classes all at the same time, pretty much. Anyway, moving on before we yap a little too long about this one. We're already going on 30 minutes now, and I have only covered one spec so far. We are going to speedrun the other ones because they have a lot of similar things here, but I want to say something here. This is actually really good. I like this ideal. It's a great ideal. I do think it should probably be like 2%. maybe even 3%. I don't care about the inspiration generates 12 focus when activated. I mainly care about the heal or rage ability that you use. This is actually really good. I know a lot of people don't actually play with it. Currently it's healing about 4k per ability use. That's not bad. There are often times where I'll out heal actual healers that get games because I'm constantly using it on myself. Obviously this is HPS to self. I'm not talking about their total HPS, but I'm talking about the HPS that's going into me. This will honestly outdo most healers that try to heal me. And that is obviously sad, but it tells you more about the state of healers right now versus anything else, really. But I do like this idea, and I do feel like this should be a little bit stronger, maybe 2 to 3%. It would make it a lot more valuable as a talent, and it would be more justifiable to be up here. If this was buffed, I honestly would not be opposed to see like Undying Rage, Mad Dash, sorry, and having choke like baseline, like having to select between these three, be actually a decent option. Well, actually, maybe not with Mad Dash. I just don't like the ideal Mad Dash mobility ability to be pitched right next to how do you put it? Defensives, I guess. So you've got a stun, so that's more of like an offensive play. This is more of a mobility play, and this is a more defensive play. I do not like this line. I think this is the worst line probably in the entire game next to what Assassin has, and I hate it. I hate it so much. There is no reason that you should be putting 3 different kind of spells all in the same spot. Mobility should be kind of all combined together. So for example, if we were really going to do this, I think Mad Dash, Snaring Slash, since it'll basically make it easier to stay on target. Those two should be the same, and then Ravage Root. I think Predation shouldn't even be in the equation. I think Predation should just be baseline. So for example, you would have Mad Dash, Snaring Slash, or the Ravage Root. I'd pretty much always use Mad Dash, but there are situations where maybe the Snaring Slash is actually really good, but I don't think it should exist. So you kind of like get my ideal there. Maybe it could be Double Leap instead. But at the same time, you know, like I don't want to give up Double Leap for Blade Blitz. That's actually a very difficult one, and I think a lot of people would agree with me. They wouldn't want that. So it's a really difficult thing to do. And I feel like a lot of our buttons are just missing. So unfortunately, I can't actually pin down that row as much as I want. It is a bias thing. I've played this class for a long time. This is my main spec. And with all the stuff that I'm currently missing, if I was to reobtain most of those back, I don't care about fear. Fear can stay gone for all I care. I am very happy that the game is in the state where nobody's really using fear. We're in a better spot. I would love to see Pacify back as Ruthless Aggressor. Ruthless Aggressor was incredibly strong. However, you know, there's probably a chance that we won't see that. But let's say, imagine if this row was Ruthless Aggressor, Guarded by the Force, or Inspired Focus, and Inspired Focus got, you know, buffed. You know, like those are good options, I would say. The percent heal would be really good against dots. Guarded by the Force would be really good against burst. And Ruthless Aggressor would be really good against like yellow damage burst. Like obviously having Ruthless Aggressor more often, if you're able to actually time it against yellow damage burst, like if you're an experienced player, Ruthless Aggressor is going to pull ahead of Guarded by the Force. However, if you've got like mixed damage burst and whatnot, you're pretty much going to default to Guarded by the Force. That actually wouldn't be a bad lineup. That could be something that could be done. And then this one, this is another one of those things like, you know, this should probably really be like this one and what was the other one? Ravage Root, maybe this one, Ravage Root, and Mad Dash should all be in the same spot. But even then, I feel like Mad Dash is just that much better. So it's really hard to pin down Mad Dash. Mad Dash is one of the spells that I just do feel like probably should be baseline. I've been yapping about this freaking spell for way too long. I'm sorry. This is another thing too. Like this is really good. It never needed to be pruned from, I believe it was part of Carnage originally, or Fury. I think it was Carnage though. There was really no reason for this to basically be pruned. It should go back to being a passive, much like how this one should go back to being a passive. But you know, I understand. Like if we're gonna have this, and that are all like the same tier of usefulness. Like this also could be included there, and this one. Basically, if you remember how old talents were, it's kind of like the low tier grade, and then you can make the mid tier grade, and then like the high tier grade. I would much prefer that system back. This system is just not very good. Now we pretty much finished concentration. Let's go ahead and go to combat real quick. Now the main thing I want to talk about here is that you lose your Sunder taking driving lance. I do want the Sunder back. I don't understand why we lose it. This isn't necessarily an advantage or an increase to your damage. All it does is help mobility and movement speed. So in reality, I do feel like this should probably get its Sunder back, if they're even aware that it loses its Sunder when you pick this one. This one's very interesting in concept. I think this is actually a pretty solid one, and I totally understand like the reasons to run both of these. I do think that these are on the same tier of usefulness. And then this one, unfortunately, I just don't feel like this one is worthwhile. I think they should delete the tactical that allows you to do an AoE Devastating Blast and replace it here. I think this would be more interesting if you could use Devastating Blast hits like more than one target. So like it could make it like dual saber throw. So for example, if you were Devastating Blasting and there was somebody behind them within like 4 meters to 8 meters, you know, you hit 2 or 3 targets. I think that would be way more interesting, and it would value more giving up like driving lance for it. However, maybe put a limit of maybe 2 to 3 targets on it. A very cool thing though. I just think lance is a horrible ability in current state, and if lance was to get its auto crit back, then maybe it could be better, but for the most part, lance is just, it's a utility spell at this point. My statement opinion goes for this row. We're not going to talk about it. This one right here is so incredibly strong that it kind of like makes and breaks the spec. The spec is able to achieve 98% crit rate on its Blade Rush, which is Massacre, with Shards of Mortis. You typically always want to run this one, and it also gives you a cooldown reduction on your Valor's Call, which allows you to berserk more often, which means you get more berserks, I guess you could say. You get more frenzies for berserk. And then this one would be Valor's Call and Zen. So basically this means that you are able to have your alacrity higher more often and have a better burst window because you're allowed to have 3 stacks of precision with Zen up. And then you have this one. This one seems interesting in theory, but for the most part, it's just not as competitive as having raw crit chance on an ability that is your core filler. So I don't feel like this one compares like at all in usefulness. Very cool in theory though. And then this one, honestly, it should just be a passive. There's no reason for this to be a talent. It is not that strong. If it was like 5% damage reduction, you know, then maybe, sure. But for the most part, I don't feel like it has any business being here. And honestly, if it's going to be a defensive thing, it should be a lot stronger. You should be forced to pick other defenses over it rather than, you know, picking DPS. And then we have something very, or not useful, but interesting here. This one, quickness. I really like this one. However, you know, Shards of Mortis being as broken as it is currently, there's little to no reason to ever really run this one. So that's unfortunate. I would probably sit on this one. This one's a very interesting one. There's a lot of cool things that you could do with this. Shards of Mortis, however, just makes it completely irrelevant, and at the same time, the movement speed that you get from this one is insane. You also get critical hit chance, which is very nice. This is part of what allows you to hit 98% crit rate on your Blade Rush. So having this plus Shards of Mortis, which in my opinion, Shards of Mortis completely breaks the game. This is another thing that's really nice. It stacks with this. Without this up, Marauder is very weak. It doesn't do anywhere near as much damage. So if you're able to stall out the 6-second window, by the way, if you guys are curious about how to deal with Carnage Marauder, deny them the ability to land abilities for 6 seconds or shut them down in the window. Let's say you have Overload Binds and they don't have a breaker for that, or to get out of that, or Purge or whatever. That's a great way to stop them, and then just to make sure that they can't get back into that. They have the ability to stack back up to get full power again, and they will be much easier to deal with. then this one again, you know, current state, it's kind of bad. Now this one's mostly the same. I honestly don't understand why Fury has less AoE damage reduction compared to Carnage, but you know, that's the thing. These just don't equal the same power as mobility. So I would say in this situation, honestly, I would just not put these in the same tree. I don't think there's anything wrong with this one. I think this one's not bad. I do feel like the internal and elemental damage reduction should probably go back to being baseline. That's just my opinion. Because Carnage used to be, or used to have this like baseline, and it's just not as tanky as the other two specs, if that makes sense. Then this one, we've already talked about this one, these two, with those two. And then we talked about Zealous Ward. It should probably just be baseline at this point, and or they should rework Super Ward to be damage reduction. Maybe they could even make Zealous Ward turn into damage reduction if you take this talent. I would not be opposed against that too. That's another ideal for like the defensive row. Let's say if we don't get pacified, this gets turned out to damage reduction instead. And then you could put it in this row, remove Mad Dash from it, if Undying Rage, Zealous Ward, and the 3% heal on Inspired Focus. I don't think that would be terrible. However, in reality, you know, when it comes to defensive changes for this class, I feel like it should be taken over Assault, and they should actually ask the community what might be good, but also at the same time, you have to be fair, because the class is defensively not that great. It should do more damage than anything, but at the same time, it shouldn't do so much damage that the enemies don't really have a chance to deal with them. I feel like there is a fine line between damage and damage reduction, and this class is lacking in damage reduction. Even if it meant that Rebuke only got a 5% increase, I wouldn't be mad about that. Honestly, I feel like that would be a small buff, but it would be noticeable to the point that class would feel less bad. Now, I understand why this talent got nerfed. However, there's almost no reason to really run either of these outside of this one. Having more uptime on your Zen means more auto crits on your dots, which basically just means more damage. For the most part, this extra crit doesn't matter when you can have auto crits on your dots, so that just completely becomes irrelevant. This one was cool, but unfortunately it doesn't really hit that much at all anymore after they nerfed it. So I don't really care about this one. It's not very good. And then this one just really is better. They've turned this back into pretty much just a parsing bot. This one is very inconsistent. We don't actually know exactly how much damage it typically does. And I'm sorry if you hear that background noise. There's a plane going by. And then we have the trauma one. I don't feel like this one's terrible. This is actually kind of interesting. I usually run this one over the other two. This one's also really interesting, but for the most part, when you're playing this spec, you kind of feel like you need Spiteful Saber because so much damage is tied to your dots and so much damage is tied to Spiteful Saber that not running it and running this doesn't feel good. Then you also have this talent. This talent just, honestly, it doesn't feel good. I don't know why it exists. It seemed like it was a cool idea, but for the most part, it feels like a dead noob bait kind of like talent. So I think that's for this one until they change that. And then this one just ends up being way too strong. This one allows you to get your Zen up even more often, which means that you can have your auto crit dots pretty much all the time. Double leap is great, you know, having the internal and elemental damage. Again, you have that option here again. Maybe just give this same talent to all three. End the story, you know, just have it. It really wouldn't be that bad of a talent choice for all three. Fury having to pick a CC immunity is silly. Do I think Annihilation should probably get some CC immunity? Yeah, if the other two are going to get it, I do think Annihilation 100% should have it. It doesn't have the same burst levels. One burst, or one way to increase the burst on Annihilation, I do think the tactical called Dispatcher, they should change it from Vicious Slash to Annihilate. That would be a great way to change it. It would also add some skill ceiling to the class, because that means you could use the unproc dual saber throw get an auto crit, and then use the procced one, get another auto crit. So there would be some finesse into the class once again, and that would be awesome to see. And then we kind of like already talked about these, so to avoid going on even further, I'm going to call it here. I feel like we've talked about most of the things that I want to talk about here. Let's go back to Fury real quick. And let's say hypothetically, right, if we took all of our utility and all of our defenses and we kind of like puddled them all into one here. We're looking at Zillus Ward, guarded by the Force, inspired by the inspired focus. I would consider kind of like as a defensive thing. It's more of like a healy thing, but I get the ideal. I take those three, and then like change this to AoE DR instead. But I wouldn't put it on the same level as your defensives. Like have those three, put them in the same row. This, that one. I feel like all of those, and then maybe like Ravage Root should all be the same. Maybe Ravage Root and Scissor and maybe Trailblazer could be in a row all together. Adjudicator, Stoic, and Adamant could also all be in a row together. And then when it comes to Force Choke, I do feel like Force Choke and Transcendence should probably be baseline. And or, if not Choke, make Mad Dash. Honestly, baseline, I do feel like that would be a great help to the class for mobility. And when it comes to melee, mobility is a lot more important, as range usually have the advantage, and yeah, it could be something that they could do, but also, you know, it could be bias here. Obviously, a lot of people are going to disagree with me, and that's totally fine. It's just my personal feedback. Anyway, so let's say, what could we do for like another row? Double Leap, Force Choke. That would be not a bad selection. What else would you want to put there? That would make sense. Yeah, that's a hard one. Without being able to visually represent English, these, it's kind of difficult. I'm going to pause here, see if I can't do something about that real quick. All right, so what I'm thinking about here, when we break this down, the easiest way for me to think of this, and I honestly think that maybe we should go back to that old talent system. If anything, it's a lot more well thought out compared to what we have currently, but to give some more direction to this, because it seems like this class is not very well understood. We could be looking at this one being reworked, maybe Blood Ward just becoming baseline. It could be a thing, but also at the same time, maybe speccing into this talent changes your Saber Ward into damage reduction instead of defense chance, allowing PvPers to still take the defense chance, and for those that don't want to take this talent, defense chance would still be an option. Obviously, against a lot of wide damage, you want to keep it on defense chance, but if you're not against a lot of wide damage, you're probably going to want the damage reduction. It's going to be way more valuable for you. That is a way to actually create a non-dead defensive talent for the class. And it also means that they would have options of selecting like Guarded by the Force. But let's say they didn't need Guarded by Force, or they changed Guarded by Force to what I had talked about with the Rebuke cooldown reduction to making Guarded by the Force better. And if they were to do that Rebuke one, they could put it like 4 seconds and 3-minute cooldown. I wouldn't be opposed to that. That would be not a bad compromise if they were to do that. However, if it just stays the same way that it currently is, it could be a reason to go Saber Ward over the DR Zillus Ward, or a Saber Ward, and then having the 3% heal. There would be actually scenarios where you would run all three. Sometimes, like especially in Rex, you probably would go with the percent heal. It's just going to outperform 9 times out of 10. If you're against a lot of burst, a lot of yellow damage, a lot of strokes and whatnot, you already have a healer. The Saber Ward one is going to be highly valuable. Or if you're playing arena against a lot of bursts and you're a target, Guarded by the Force is always going to be a great option. However, we can like steer away from immunities or god modes. I think that would be a good ideal. So I wouldn't be opposed to like that loadout. Leaving this alone, giving more reasons to not run this is a great ideal, in my opinion, because honestly, a lot of the god modes in the game aren't very fun to play against. So that could be an ideal, giving more power to the other talent options there. And then I think obviously this one, that one, and this one. And then Ravager also should all be like in their own selection. I think mobility should have its own row. So when it comes to mobility, we're thinking like mad dash, double leap, and obviously prediction shouldn't be in the line, but it should be baseline. But they could think of something else that would fit in that row, or it could just be just those two. Like it doesn't have to be 3 selections. Honestly, it could just be 2 selections, and that wouldn't be a terrible ideal. Mad dash or double leap. That's not a bad selection. Both of them would get play. Then having a row specifically focused on damage, not put any other ones. So for example, criticality, and these aren't actually you see your damage, but for example, let's go to Carnage. Carnage is got a good example of this. This one and this one. Like having both of these at the same time is great. Don't get me wrong. However, if they were both to be on the same row, it's suddenly this class becomes not as powerful as it was before. So I do think there is a good assault. Maybe some of these should be fused, but at the same time, you know, I do think having a damage row, whether there's 2 damage rows or 1 damage row, having all these damage talents, kind of like more centered around each other. Obviously, one's going to just be better than the other, depending on what you're doing. I think this is kind of a dead talent. I think this one is also just doesn't belong here in this row. If quickness was here, you know, this would be interesting, and then there'd be some unique cases where you'd run quickness over this one, but this one's just, I feel it's dead. And if it was between these 3, this would be an incredibly hard choice, because sometimes you would, if they were to change things, this one could be really cool. Like in Dedu's Malavence, the old one, I think would be incredible with that. However, that doesn't really exist anymore. Now it's kind of crap. Get like a dot in your lance or something. That's not very good. So as an ideal, have a damage row. Then have it obviously outside the mobility row. We should have a defensive row and a utility row. So for example, like these, and these. They should be utility, right? And not all of them do. They have to be 3 tiers, and a lot of these could just be passives. There's no reason to make this tree as complicated as it is. There's a lot of new bait things. If you're making something just for the sake of it existing, whether than actually being competitive with the other talent choices, it's kind of silly. You're just artificially nerfing the class, and if people pick the wrong talents, they are screwed. It's not a fun experience. It's not a good experience for new players. It actually just hurts the community as a whole, because some people are not going to look up things and they're going to try it and they're like, man, that feels terrible. I don't want to play that anymore. Steering away from that would be a good ideal and a great design choice. Anyway, yeah, there's a lot of things that they could do. I've wanted to make this video for a while. I've already had a lot of thoughts about this. I have thoughts like this for every single melee in the game, and then there's also some of the range that I also think this is a thing. However, things like, let's say, Guardian and Juggernaut, I don't feel like they need this as bad because their talent rows are actually pretty good. There's some classes that they actually did a really good job on. So for example, look at Lethality Operative, look at the APPT, pyro PT. I think Shield Tech's not too bad. So like Power Tech's another good one. And I think Juggernaut is also not a bad one. They did good on those classes. However, when it comes to this class, they did terribly. When it comes to Assassin, they did terribly. They got really unique things, and I think they're awesome. I think their talent layout is horrible in comparison. Other than that, we've yapped for 54 minutes, so nearly an hour of just talking about a class that I guess a lot of you guys like. I've loved this class for a long time. I've played this class for a long time. This is not even my main Marauder. This is my second Marauder I made. The only reason I even stepped into Marauder in the first place was because I had my share and geared so much. I originally started the game as a Vanguard, then I moved over to Sorcerer. I really liked the Sorcerer story. You still had to gear your companions at the time. At max gear already, so every extra bit of gear I gave, I just sent it to Ashara to basically do my dailies and whatnot faster so I get more credits. I stepped into PvP. I liked Marauder. I didn't know that I would like Marauder, but I am loving it, and it just happened to be the class for me. Like, this class just speaks to me. Carnage is something I've always enjoyed. I really dislike the progression that they've made with the class overall. It's still incredibly fun. I still find the combat in this game incredibly fun, as much as I complain about this game, which I know a lot of people, oh, you complain so much. Well, if I don't complain, you know, how much worse can it get, you know? Like, if nobody complains, nobody's going to know something's wrong. There's obviously issues, everybody complains. I do it out of love for the game, and I would love to see it do better. Anyway, I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day, and I appreciate you sticking around listening to this really long yap session about just one class in the game rather than the other 7.